comfortably zoned with the Zig Zag Man in Alameda, California, pushing on the doors of life marked pull and fighting the unholy trinity as we go. Big business, organized religion, and government.
I am back. Comfortably Zoned Radio from Alameda, California. I'm Ralph Tycho. We're right across the bay from San Francisco and in the eastern part of the great state of Northern California. It's going to be two states someday. You watch and see. Got a great guest. He wrote a book that I'm very interested in. His name is Larry Baldassaro, and you're calling Larry. We're hooking up on this very flawed system this morning from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Larry, how are you?
Very good, Ralph. How are you?
Oh, good. We're doing a little podcast radio, and my station is basically baseball, sports, but this fits right in. I'm excited to have you. The book is Beyond Dimaggio, and if I don't mind saying, we have talked on this station, Peter Golenbach, Tony Castro, written books about the subject endlessly. But nothing's definitive. We can't come to any strong conclusions about what Joe Dimaggio is like, but we could really add to it today by examining the times he grew up in and how that affected him. And basically the subtitle of your book, I'll let you tell me the subtitle of your book, Beyond Dimaggio.
Yeah, the subtitle is Italian Americans in Baseball, so this is strictly not a book about Joe Dimaggio or the Dimaggio family, but basically the first comprehensive history of Italian American participation in baseball.
And you can't start, and it starts and ends almost with the name Joe Dimaggio. Can you give us some idea what a hero Joe Dimaggio was because of his times and how Italian Americans were during the war, leading up to the war, being persecuted much in the same way as Japanese Americans, how much it meant to Italian Americans to have Joel and Joe representing them?
Well, it meant a lot. I think, though, just to put it in some context, you really have to go back before Joe came along to understand his impact and why it happened when it did. And I think a really important predecessor to Joe was another San Francisco native, Tony Lazzeri. In fact, virtually all of the important early Italian-American major leaguers were from the San Francisco Bay Area. An incredible amount. I mean, by 1940, just after Joe came into the majors, there were 40 Italian-Americans in Major League Baseball, and at least 16 of those were from the San Francisco Bay Area. You go back to a guy named Ping Bodie, who made his Major League debut in 1911, and he played with the Yankees. He roomed with Babe Ruth for a while. He was a slugging outfielder. The first Italian-American to make it really big in the majors. And, of course, nobody would have known from his name, Ping Bodie, that he was Italian. His real name was Francesco Pezzolo. And, of course, as others did, he changed his name because, it wasn't chic to be Italian at that time. So that kind of got the ball rolling.
It's never chic to be a minority in any time.
True.
And, so they were making an adjustment to this country. And that would have been a baseball name, although Ping rings a bell. Ping Bodie, I didn't realize he was Italian, again, as you said,
right.
From his name. You mentioned Tony Lazzeri, Push 'em Up Lazzeri. if I'm not mistaken, he was one of two, Frank Crosetti being the other, also Bay Area Italian, who drove Joe from San Francisco to spring training. And the famous story is, Joe, they had nothing to say. Joe said absolutely nothing along the way. And when he got to his destination, which was spring training, he was much heralded. The reporters asked him for a quote, and he thought a quote was a soft drink.
Well, another detail about that drive, Frank Crosetti, when I interviewed Frank by phone some years ago, he confirmed the whole story about how all three of them were very quiet. In fact, what they said about Tony Lazzari is that one writer said, trying to interview Tony Lazzari is like mining coal with a nail file. So all three of these guys were very quiet. And Crosetti told me they had driven probably, I don't know, somewhere in the southwest of Florida, and they had done all the driving. And at one point, they said, well, let's let the kid do some of the driving. And Joe said, I don't know how to drive. And according to Crosetti, those were about the only words they exchanged on the whole trip.
How young? He must have been like 20 years old, something like that. Not much older.
Right. Yeah, because the Yankees signed him, but they insisted that he stay one more year with the Seals because he had had an injury, and they were worried about that. So he had to prove himself for one more season before they brought him up to New York.
What did you learn about, when writing this book, what did you learn about Joe Dimaggio that might surprise me, my audience? What surprised you about him?
Well, I'm not sure there were any big surprises. I think what I came to understand, look, again, a little context here. I grew up in Massachusetts, so I was a Red Sox fan. My hero was Ted Williams. So I didn't like Joe Dimaggio. I didn't like Yogi Berra, Phil Rizzuto, or Vic Raschi when I was a kid, because obviously they were beating my Red Sox all the time. So I guess my surprise really when I started working on this book, in which I found a lot more information than I ever imagined, was that I came to have a grudging respect for all these great Italian Yankees, because I realized what they meant, not only in terms of their contributions to baseball, but their contributions to the Italian Americans of America. Again, going back to Lazzari, he was the first. I mean, he came up in 1926. 1924, Congress passed that very strict immigration law that allowed only a very small percentage of Southern and Eastern Europeans to immigrate to the United States. There was such an anti-immigrant backlash after World War I. So that was in 1924, and Lazzari comes along in 1926 as a rookie, and immediately hits 18 home runs, second in the American League to Babe Ruth. He's playing on one of the greatest teams of all time, and he's the third best hitter after Ruth and Gehrig. And he was the first to really attract Italian fans. In fact, that's why the Yankees signed him, because they were looking for an Italian ball player who could attract all those Italian Americans in New York City who weren't going to ball games. And of course, the irony is they found one out on the West Coast in San Francisco, because in 1925, Lazzari, playing for the Salt Lake City Bees in the Pacific Coast League, hit 60 home runs, which had never been done before in professional baseball. So that's why they signed him, brought him to New York, and he was a tremendous success from his rookie year on. So Italian-American fans started coming to the ballpark. People that had not been to baseball probably knew little, if anything, about baseball, but now they had a hero of their own. They would come and wave the Italian flag. When the Yankees would go on the road, they'd have banquets to honor Lazzari in every city. So he was the one that sort of, started this change in terms of not only introducing a major Italian-American star into baseball, but by doing that and being the kind of player he was, because he was quiet, he was efficient, went about his business like a blue-collar worker, and he was also considered one of the smartest men in baseball. Ed Barrow, who was GM of the... Go ahead.
Excuse me, where did the name Push 'em Up Lazzari come from?
Well, that goes back to his days in Salt Lake City. There was apparently a restaurant owner who became a big fan, and he'd go to the ballpark, and his sort of, his accent, he would yell out, "Push 'em up, Tony, push 'em up." And that stuck with him even when he went to New York. Meaning, drive in the runners, move them ahead.
Right, or get them over, or yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I really make the argument, and we'll get back to Dimaggio, of course. But
the book, I'm surprised you didn't have Lazzari and his picture on the cover of your book. Did you think about that, or did you use Dimaggio because of the name recognition?
Well, sure. Look, I mean, the title is Beyond Dimaggio, meaning this is a history of Italian Americans before and after Joe Dimaggio. But clearly, Dimaggio is the most recognizable name, so.
Yes, absolutely. And it certainly gets everybody's attention.
Right.
Learned a little bit about Tony Lazzari. That you got an interview at all with Crosetti, I commend you. In the 90s, I was doing a video documentary on, not necessarily a documentary, but it was for a college in the East Bay here, Hayward State, and I had writers, coaches, managers, Charlie Fox, Hank Sauer, all people from the 50s, and in New York baseball, I had Leonard Coppett, and I got Charlie Silvera, the Yankee catcher, who wasn't Italian, but he led me to Frank Crosetti, who simply refused to come in and do an interview. He was too shy, didn't want any part of it. I'm sure Crosetti was a reluctant person and not an easy person to get information out of. I'm just guessing.
Well, that was certainly my perception because, again, he had that reputation of being quiet and didn't really like to, I think, accommodate the media when he was a player or a coach. So, honestly, I was surprised. I can't remember who gave me his phone number in California, and I called him up. And I guess I caught him on a good day because he was cordial and forthcoming, gave me a lengthy interview with terrific stories about Lazzari, about Lazzari's pulling pranks on Babe Ruth and so forth. I was delighted and very pleased by his response.
Nice.
And in fact, my next book is a collection of interviews I've done over the years with Italian-American major leaguers, and it will begin with that interview with Frank Crosetti and go right up to the current day. Very
nice. Now, you don't happen to be Larry Baldassaro. You don't happen to be Italian yourself, do you? You're not in.
Well, I'm a grandson of 4 Italian immigrants, and one of the reasons I wrote...
Oh, I get it now, Larry.
Yeah. No, one of the reasons I wrote this book was as a way to pay homage to my 4 grandparents, who had the courage to come to this country and try to build a better life for them and their family, and they gave me, by doing that, a great opportunity.
And you certainly took advantage of it. You're a professor, actually a professor emeritus. Tell me about your educational career.
Well, the reason I became a professor of Italian was almost accidental. I thought I was going to be an English professor. That's my major in undergraduate school. Even though I grew up in a family where my maternal grandmother lived with us, and she and my mom always spoke Italian or their Abruzzese dialect. And my grandmother would speak to me in her dialect, which I understood because I heard it all the time, but I would answer only in English because when I was a kid, you didn't want to be ethnic. This is, the years after World War II. You wanted to be American even if you didn't know what that meant. So I didn't know.
I'm a Tikachinsky. My father had the name shortened when I was in kindergarten.
Right. Yeah.
Jews went through exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Assimilation was very important. What people called you in the schoolyard, this, that, and the other thing. And to be honest with you, I think that we miss the individuality that the different cultures brought. We've all become homogenized, and I don't know if that's good, bad, or ugly.
Well, it's the reality either way. I mean, there's a price to pay. I mean, these ball players who went on to become heroes and all the Italian Americans and other ethnic Americans who realized that they had to assimilate, at least to some extent, to make it in this country. And in doing so, they gave up part of their identity to some greater or lesser extent.
Right. And not just ball players. There was...
yeah, everybody. So that's why when I said it was accidental that I became a teacher of Italian, because while I was in college, in the summer between my junior and senior years, I went to Italy and I discovered the culture there. I went to visit the birthplace of my mother. I even slept in the same room where she was born in a little farm compound in Abruzzo. And I just fell in love with the culture and my heritage. That's when I discovered my identity. And then when I went to graduate school, I studied Italian instead of English and became a professor of Italian. It was just, like everything else, timing is everything.
Absolutely. Bloomington, Illinois, what's that like for a person of any ethnicity?
No, Bloomington, Indiana. I went to graduate school at IU. Yeah, but it's sort of it's on the border of north and south, let's say. But, being at the university, you really weren't involved in the town that much, so I felt no difficulty there whatsoever. It was a great place to go to graduate school.
I can imagine. Actually, my son's mother went there for graduate school, and her dad is a professor emeritus in Fresno, and he studied the great Italian architect whose name escapes me, has buildings in San Rafael, California, the courthouse. Wow.
Is it Renzo Piano?
Pardon me?
Is it Renzo Piano?
No, it isn't.
No? Okay. Well, that's the one architect whose name I know.
Okay. Well, I thought that would be the connect from Bloomington to Fresno, California, and Joseph Satin, the late Joseph Satin. Larry, in your next book, are these interviews already completed, or are you still adding it to your list of folks that you want to talk to?
I think I've just completed it. I've 2 days ago did an interview with Rick Porcello, the Cy Young Award winner with the Red Sox. They were here playing the Brewers. And a week before that, when the Reds were here, I interviewed Joey Votto. So I think I'm wrapping it up. I've got about 42 or 43. The first extensive interview I did goes back to 1993 when the Yankees were visiting Milwaukee, and I sat in the visitors' radio booth with Phil Rizzuto, and I was mesmerized for about an hour listening to his fantastic stories. He was a delight. He was just terrific.
Two people whom I respect told me that Phil Rizzuto was as nice a human being as they've met in their entire lives. One was Peter Golenbach, and the other was my friend Peter Trunk, who would have breakfast with him in a New Jersey diner on a most regular basis on their way to their respective lives, and they just sit and yak, and I wish I would have gotten to speak with him. Have you heard his Hall of Fame, and I'm sure you have, his Hall of Fame induction speech?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was a classic.
It was a classic. Absolutely humanizes him and tells it like it is. Phil Rizzuto was released by the Yankees after a stellar career. They decided to release him, I think it was 1957, on Old Timers Day.
Right.
The old-time Yankees are coming in, and Phil Rizzuto is called into the office, and here's what they said to him. They said, "Phil, we have to release somebody. Who do you recommend we release?" And Phil says, "Well, I don't know." That was my Phil Rizzuto. He says, "I don't know, White. Who should we release?" They went through a number of names, he and George Weiss. And George Weiss looks at him and says, "You know what? Thanks for your advice. It's you we're releasing." On friggin' Old Timers Day. So he has to go out, clean out his locker. All the old-time ball players are there. Doesn't say a word. This is the class the man has. Gets in his car and drives over the bridge to New Jersey. And because he had this kind of class and didn't go to the press and, whatever, the Yankee ownership, which was incredibly conservative, would take no criticism at that time, and slow to go to minorities. It is a surprise that they went to the Italians as a minority because they were very slow to go to the blacks. He got a job with them. He got a lifetime job as an announcer a year later with the Yankees. He got to be trained by Red Barber, who was let go by the Dodgers, or he quit the Dodgers when Branch Rickey was forced out, and they formed a terrific tandem with the Yankees. And Phil went on his own before he became a caricature of himself. Really, he was a really good announcer, one of the few former players that could adapt to that job. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah, he had a style of his own, there's no question about it, and he was beloved by the fans. He spent 53 years in the Yankee organization between playing and announcing. It's an all-time record.
Right, absolutely. What was your how did you get tied to, I know how you got tied to being an Italian, and it wasn't your fault.
Yeah.
You just, boom. How'd you get tied to being a baseball fan? Had the love for that?
Oh yeah, that was, baseball was my first love as a kid. I mean, everybody when I was a kid played baseball. But I really got hooked. I still remember age of 10 going out to my first practice with a team called the Pee Wee League then, before it was called Little League. And I swear it was a Saturday morning, walking across the field toward the diamond of this park, and I still remember the smell of the grass. I mean, I was just hooked. And then I just started playing, and I played through Little League and high school, American Legion, a little bit in college, 1 year of semi-pro. So I've just been a baseball fan passionately as long as I can remember.
What's the number one lesson you learned in baseball that you'd pass on to your child or grandchild or friend of a friend?
Oh boy. Well, let me tell you a little different story about my connection with baseball and what it meant to me, and I suppose what I learned. in 1992, when I was here in Milwaukee, and I'd started writing for the Milwaukee Brewers magazine as a hobby in 1990. And Phil Garner was the manager of the Brewers at the time, and I was in the clubhouse one day, and I heard him and the batting coach talking about the need for an extra batting practice pitcher because, somebody had dropped out or something. And at that point, I hadn't touched a hard ball in like 30 years. I was playing slow pitch softball. So I went in and I talked to Garner, and he said, if you think you'd do it, let me know when you're ready. And for 2 weeks, I went with a buddy and practiced throwing every night. And I went back and played catch with Garner. And he says, okay, come back tomorrow. And so that started my career as a batting practice pitcher. And what I learned from that, again, I loved baseball my whole life, been a Red Sox fan. But what that taught me was an appreciation for how good these guys are at that level. When you're down on the field and you're throwing pitches from the bottom of the mound, you're less than 60 feet away, you really understand how hard they hit the ball. Then after I pitch, I go out in left field and shag fly balls. And again, that ball will get on you so quickly that if you're sitting in the stands or watching on TV, there's no way you can perceive the speed at which the game is played at that level. So that just gave me a greater appreciation for the difficulty of playing the game at the level that even average major leaguers can play it at. That's, I guess, the biggest lesson I've learned in my life about baseball.
That's a nice fantasy camp you had.
Yeah, I did that with the Red Sox too, but that was a little different because the guys in the fantasy camp were like my age and older, so they weren't playing at that speed by any means.
Right. Right. Well, I had a little fantasy camp, and a lot of it involved the Brewer organization. In the 80s and 90s, I was the Topps baseball card representative on the West Coast.
Right.
I got to see a lot of the Brewers that were coming up, the Sheffields and those guys, when they were playing out in Stockton,
right,
California, and that was the Cal League, and I got to meet Gary Sheffield under some strange circumstances. He was an enigmatic guy, very complicated human being in those days. I don't suppose you have any Gary Sheffield stories that you'd like to share.
No, I don't have any story. I mean, he was here when I first started writing, so I never did a story on him. He was difficult, though.
Yes, he was, as a human being. Hope he's changed. I hope he's found a little peace. He had a very turbulent career and an incredible talent, I will say that.
Yeah, yes, he was.
And maybe it's best that we leave it all at that, huh?
Right.
Okay. Hey, Larry, you're terrific. I hope you'll come back. I'll send you a link to this interview when I publish it. And it was fun. I enjoy yakking with you.
Well, I enjoyed it too, Ralph. Thanks so much for having me on.
Right. Yeah, and we both worked through a little technical problems at the beginning with which come with the territory when you're doing this kind of thing. And I appreciate your patience. And you're a gentleman.
No problem. No problem. Thanks again.
Friend. I'll tell you what. I'll end this segment the way I do most of mine, and I will implore you to keep your humor dry. And I'm imploring everybody out there, not just you, Larry. Keep your humor dry, keep your dreams wet, keep your kids out of military recruiting stations and off the laps of clerics wearing dresses. And your lives will all improve dramatically, depending. Larry, come back. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care, Ralph.
Be well, my friend. Bye, everybody. Catch you next time.